Welcome to Pretty Lies and Alibis. Let's seek the truth and travel the long road to justice together. What you know, Alibiers? Welcome to another episode of Pretty Lies and Alibis. I'm Gigi. It is Monday, December 30th. Hope you guys had a good weekend. I was going to try to get this out over the weekend, but my daughter left for New Orleans last night, and I decided to spend the weekend with her. We're going to recap the preliminary hearing for Cora Twombly and Tad Cullum, 2 of the 5 accused of killing Veronica Butler and Jillian Kelley. Just a reminder, this case is all over child custody. We're seeing that so much these days, such a selfish thing to do, because what they're doing is putting this incredible burden on these children for the rest of their lives when they're old enough to find out why their mother was killed, and in this case, 2 mothers. It was a little hard getting this together because this was not live streamed. I've talked to several people who were in the courtroom who were able to fill in some gaps and then just pulling from all the coverage, mainly local coverage of this case. And a big shout out to Lauren Conlin. She had great coverage of the preliminary hearing. She was kind enough to take some time to clarify a lot of things for me. I'm going to link her website in the description. Check it out. She's really, really good at what she does. Now, Tifany Adams is the biological grandmother to the 2 children at the center of all this. She had alleged abuse while the kids were in Veronica's custody, and that's the motive for these murders. It's all hogwash. Nothing's ever been substantiated, and we see that a lot too, where people who want custody will allege abuse that's never validated. Veronica had supervised visits with her children, and the second victim, Jillian Kelley, she was the court-appointed supervisor that day. It's said these women really weren't close. They were just together for that pickup. I'm going to leave this one graphic up on the screen because there are so many players in this case, and that way you can kind of follow along if you're on YouTube with who's who. And just a reminder, if you're watching on YouTube and you haven't subscribed, please hit subscribe, like the video, and share it with your friends who may be interested in this case. I'm also doing a lot of YouTube shorts these days to put out little bits and pieces of news where I don't have enough for a whole episode. Let's jump in. Since this was a preliminary hearing, some of the information was not followed up on, and it can seem a bit incomplete, and it will come out if this goes to trial, which I kind of think maybe the others will take deals and just try to get death off the table. We have 2 deals struck at this point, Cora Twombly and Paul Grice. Paul took the deal to get the death penalty off the table. Cora agreed to testify for the state to keep her teenage daughter from having to testify at an eventual trial. For that, she got an at least 30-year sentence in prison, and that's where we are as far as deals go. Her daughter was distraught after hearing about things before the murder and after. After seeing social media posts about the missing women, Cora's daughter went to her brother's house, and from there, they called law enforcement. Tifany, the grandmother, I call her Grandma Tifany, she waived her right to the preliminary hearing the day it was supposed to start, and also a speedy trial. So that left Cora Twombly and Tad Cullum. Tifany's boyfriend, Tad Cullum, was said to be surprised at the news that she was waiving her preliminary and her speedy trial. Just a reminder, I did do an episode going over the autopsies for the 2 women. I'm going to link that in the description as well as the playlist for this case. If you haven't caught up on everything, I got you covered. But Veronica had 33 stab wounds and Jillian had 16. Cora testified that the group knew each other growing up in Oklahoma. Cora said that her and her boyfriend Cole were watching videos about their constitutional rights, and Paul Grice came by to buy a puppy, and then they started a conversation, and that's essentially how this group, God's Misfits, formed. Cora said the name was kind of a joke since the group didn't fit in, and Paul said they're not affiliated with any other group. Cora and Grandma Tifany bonded over the both of them having kids with addiction issues, and when Paul Grice was on the stand, he said Tifany said the children were being abused by a family member of Veronica's. He himself was a victim of childhood abuse, and they bonded over that. The God's Misfits group met for a prayer group on Wednesdays and Sundays, and he said there were usually about 10 others in attendance as well as their children. When Paul testified, he said the 5 of them that were in on the murder were essentially a subgroup, and the others in God's Misfits were not involved. The first witness called on the first day was Cora Twombly. She said back in August of 2023, Tifany mentioned she needed to get rid of Veronica, and they needed to do what they needed to do to keep her grandkids safe. She said this had been a 4-year custody battle, and she was out of money. The first plan was to throw a vise into the windshield of Veronica's car as she was driving. Tifany wanted to do this on Veronica's birthday, thinking Veronica may go out to celebrate and would be in her car. But Veronica didn't leave her home that day, and that plan was out the window. But that didn't stop Tifany because she started to plan to kill Veronica. That planning took place over Easter weekend of this year. By March of this year, Tifany had Paul Grice and her boyfriend Tad Cullum in on this plan. Tifany was said to use biblical scripture as to why the killing was justified and convince Paul there was abuse happening when the kids were with Veronica. Paul said he lied to the group and told them he had killed someone before, and he also said he was part of this vigilante group that would set up child predators, and then he said they would take care of people. Cora admitted on the stand that the ideas for the burner phones the gang used was her idea. She said this group met 4 or 5 times before the murder, and Grandma Tifany was the ringleader. A week before the murder, they added Cole Twombly into the mix after realizing they needed a 5th person to be a lookout in the area of Highway 95 where this would take place. They did not bring Cole into the mix earlier because of his drinking, and they were worried he might spill the beans on their plan. Cole and Cora, who are husband and wife, were designated to be the lookouts. Both Cora and Paul testified they were going to use Cole's cousin's truck and Tifany's gooseneck trailer in the plot. They planned to meet Veronica off the highway and wanted to get her out of the car by saying Veronica's daughter had a baby calf inside that trailer and her daughter wanted her to see it. The real reason was they thought the murders would happen inside that trailer, which would contain the blood. The plan was that Paul would kill Veronica and Tad Cullum would kill Jillian. They did not want to use firearms because of the noise and also law enforcement's ability to trace those firearms back to their owners. Paul testified that Grandma Tifany told him she had evidence of the abuse, which she claims was the reason for the murders. She said she had a video confession and that her boyfriend Tad had a document locked in a safe about the allegations. Paul said Tifany played on his emotions of him being a victim of childhood abuse in order to get him in on the murders. On the stand, he said he should have asked to see proof, and he also said she used scriptures to convince him to participate. Y'all, I don't know what kind of scriptures they're reading, but it's not the ones I was raised on for sure. Cora testified she was sure the abuse would continue and that the court had only ordered supervised visitation in response to the allegations of abuse. She also said Tifany told her she could not afford to keep fighting Veronica in court as a reason. Cora said when she asked Tifany about the supervisor being killed as well, Tifany said the supervisor hadn't done anything to keep the kids safe, and ultimately Jillian was collateral damage. Cora said they all had a problem with killing Jillian, but kept to the plan. The day before the murders, the group went to the scene where the murders would take place, and Tad was worried about the location, but they didn't change their plans. On the day of the murder, Cora followed Veronica and Jillian for some time from Kansas and called Paul to let him know that Veronica was on her way. Paul was hiding in the trailer. They did get Veronica outside of the car to go look inside, and when she did, Paul testified he hit her on the head with a hammer several times, so hard that the hammer broke. But Veronica was fighting Paul. He ended up getting tased on his arm. I'm not sure if he did that to himself or if Veronica was the one that did it. Both women did have evidence of stun gun marks on their autopsy, by the way. Cora was at her spot being the lookout, and then she saw two people running from the trailer back towards Veronica's car. It ended up being Paul and Veronica. So think of this, guys. Veronica had been hit on the head with a hammer so hard, it broke the hammer and she was still fighting. Paul had Veronica on the ground and she was still fighting for her life. Cora gave Tifany a stun gun, and then Cora saw Paul moving his hands up and down in a stabbing motion. Grandma Tifany and her boyfriend Tad had Jillian. It gets a little confusing here because, again, this is a preliminary and some things weren't expanded upon. But from everything I've read and heard from those who were inside the courtroom, Jillian's murder is the one that is least clear as far as how she was killed and what actually killed her. But let's look back at that autopsy report. Jillian had a total of 16 sharp force injuries, including some horrible wounds to the upper cervical spinal cord. And trigger warning, we're just going to talk for a second here about something that's very unpleasant. The examination of some of these injuries was limited given the extent of decomposition, which caused liquefaction of the brain and the spinal cord. But that said, at least partial, if not complete, spinal cord transection is favored for Jillian. Paul said Tab was going to break Jillian's neck, and it wasn't clear if he actually did, but it was alluded to. She did have a broken neck on her autopsy. Paul did say he saw Tad strangling Jillian. Paul was said to cry on the stand as he described the women screaming bloody murder during the attacks. He did not see Tad with a knife. We know Jillian did have defensive wounds, so at some point before she was likely paralyzed, she was able to lift her arms to try to shield herself from the attack. Paul testified he heard a final scream and a gasp from Jillian, and he panicked and began stabbing Veronica. He said the light came out of Veronica's eyes and then he fell to the ground. After the murders, Paul said that Tifany walked around the crime scene and the women's bodies while laughing in what Paul said was chilling and the most evil thing he's ever heard. At this point, according to my friend inside the courtroom, it was full of sobs in there. Tifany backed the trailer up to load the women's bodies inside. Paul had a pretty nasty cut on his hand. Cora gave him duct tape to wrap that wound. Cora hit the women's phone with a cinder block, wrapped them in tin foil, and put them in an ammunition container. She also covered blood on the ground with dirt. Paul was told to get in the trailer, and Tad drove to the site where the women were buried. Cora took Tifany home. At this point, Paul said he saw Jillian on her back in a corner of the trailer and thought he saw her eyes were fluttering. So he stabbed her in the neck 2 or 3 more times to kill her rather than burying her alive. It's not clear if she was in fact paralyzed or even still alive. He said it could have been the motion of the trailer moving. But he told the group that Jillian woke up and tried to attack him, so he killed her. He testified he did not remember stabbing her as many times as the autopsy report said, which was 16, but he did stab her in the neck. What he said was 2 or 3 more times. Paul was even paranoid on the way to the burial site that the group was setting him up. So when they arrived to the property, Paul pulled a gun on Tad. Paul and Tad put the bodies in the freezer, threw their bloody clothes and the knives into the grave, and then put concrete and hay over the burial site. Cole showed up with clothing for Tad and Paul to change into, and he also brought more hay. On day 2 of the preliminary, Cole Twombly waived his right to the preliminary and a speedy trial and was escorted out of the courthouse. And that left Tad Cullum as the one participating in the preliminary hearing. There was some cross-exam on day 2 with Tad Cullum's defense attorneys raising doubts that Tad actually stabbed Jillian. And when on cross-exam, Cora said she only saw Tad once at the crime scene, and when she saw him, he was helping Paul lift Veronica's body into the freezer that was inside the trailer. While on the stand, Paul was said to be emotional and remorseful, but too little, too late. Bye-bye. Jamie Beasley, the owner of the land where the bodies were found, said that Tad came asking about cameras that overlooked the highway about a week before the murders. The day before the murders, Tad offered to clean up trees and bury leftover concrete on the property. Now, we know concrete was found on top of that freezer where the women's bodies were found. The landowner said when he saw Tifany the day before the murders, she seemed really happy and he had never seen her like that before. So that was pretty much it for the preliminary. I really don't know that this goes to trial. If death's going to be on the table, I really don't see Tifany, Cole, or Tad taking it to trial. That's just my opinion. You have two people who are telling every detail, and if death's on the table, it may be easier just to plead guilty, not put the families through the horrific details of the murders, which was the subject of a lot of emotions during this preliminary, but we will see. So that was the best I could gather for the preliminary hearing between watching reports on it, going through news recaps, and then talking to people I know there in the courtroom. Again, I'm going to link Lauren Conlin's website in the description. Check her out. Super grateful for her taking time on the road to send me some voicemails, clarifying some things. I love when we all can collaborate that way and help each other out to get their stories told. That is it for today. In the meantime, I hope you guys have a good rest of your afternoon, and we will see you soon.